Have you ever felt like you're healed, but the world still tries to hurt you the same way? As if life were testing your scars to see if they still sting. As if some people insisted on poking at what you took so long to silently sew together. Rumi wrote, "The wound is the place where the light enters you. But what happens after this light enters? What happens to a soul that has been pierced and but survived? Will she love like before again? Does she still bend over for any affection? Does she bleed for anyone?" The truth is that there is a silent force in the soul that has healed. She doesn't need to scream. She doesn't need to prove herself. She just doesn't bleed anymore. Because there comes a time in life when pain stops being noise and becomes wisdom. Have you reached that point yet? Maybe you are there now, between the memory of pain and the strength of your healing. Maybe you've already cried for someone you barely remember today. You've already dragged yourself through crumbs, through unanswered messages, through loves that only knew how to be absent. But today, something in you changed. Today, it's no longer any absence that destroys you. It's no longer just any compliment that gets you hooked. It is no longer just any presence that seduces you. Because the soul that has healed itself and it feels differently. She breathes differently. She looks and sees what she previously ignored. She doesn't fall any easier. She chooses. She perceives. She filters. And maybe whoever is watching this video now knows exactly what I'm talking about. You who have had your heart broken for loving too much. You who once believed that you needed to sacrifice yourself to be loved. You who confused abandonment with destiny and rejection with merit. But now, it's different, isn't it? You still feel, you still love. But what was once a lack, today, is awareness. What was once despair is now discernment. Because there is a type of pain that, when it passes, transforms. And that's what we're here about today. About the soul that learned to withdraw when everything falls apart. About the soul that, even though wounded, decided to continue. About the soul that is no longer afraid of being alone, because it understood that solitude is peace when company is toxic. That soul, your soul, no longer bleeds for just anyone. It's not arrogance. It's protection. It's not coldness. It's maturity. It's not pride. It's respect for everything you've overcome. Rumi said, "You have to keep breaking your heart until it opens." And yours finally opened, didn't it? But now, it is sacred. It is no longer a battlefield. He is a temple, and not everyone can enter. But why does the world still try to hurt you? Why does it seem that even after so much growth, some situations come back? Why do some people insist on touching places that no longer bleed, but still pulsate? This is where it all starts to make sense, because healing doesn't make you invisible to the world. It makes you more visible to yourself. And from here on, you will understand what no one told you about what it means to be truly healed. About what it means to no longer give oneself as someone who begs, but as someone who overflows. Because the soul that has healed itself knows that not just any touch deserves access. Not just any word deserves a response. Not every absence deserves pain. And maybe you are right there in that moment, at the point where something inside you says, enough is enough, but not like before, not like someone who gives up. And yes, like someone who has finally woken up. Because now it's time to look at everything you've been through and understand why you no longer bleed. But before we go any deeper, answer me. Do you feel that way too? Have you reached that silent point where the pain no longer rules? Write in the comments, "My soul no longer bleeds for just anyone." And now, take a deep breath, because in the next step, you will find out what nobody told you about this pain that you overcame. But before we go any deeper, answer me. Do you feel that way too? Have you reached that silent point where the pain no longer rules? So share this with me. Write in the comments, "My soul no longer bleeds for just anyone." Let these words echo, not just here, but within you. This is not just a video, it's a mirror. And if something in you felt that this message was made for your soul, breathe, feel it, and leave a like, not for me, but as a symbolic gesture that you are ready to see your own healing with new eyes. Subscribe to the channel. This journey does not end here. With each video, a new part of you awakens. And now that you've come this far, it's time to reveal what really is behind the pain that visits you in silence. Have you ever felt exhausted from loving wrongly, from giving yourself completely, believing that love is a bridge, only to discover that on the other side there's no one waiting? There's a weariness that can't be cured by sleep or distractions. It's a weariness of the soul, a profound exhaustion from trying to be seen, loved, respected, and always ending up with the same feeling of emotional invisibility. Maybe you've been through this without even realizing it, because those who love with a bare heart often grow accustomed to the other's silence, to emptiness disguised as presence, to crumbs wrapped in beautiful words. But there's something that comes with time, with pain, with the repetition of the same cycles: awareness. And it's this awareness that begins to whisper, maybe the problem isn't the one who hurts you anymore, but the one you still allow to get close. Have you ever noticed that even after so much disappointment, you keep attracting the same type of person, the same bonding pattern, the same story with different names? This is no coincidence. This is your soul trying to show you something. There's an invisible pattern that repeats itself, an emotional signature you still carry, and it attracts not the love you deserve, but the love you still accept. It's not easy to admit this, because it hurts to think that somehow we were the ones who left the door open to someone who only knew how to destroy, that perhaps we were the ones who mistook intensity for affection, instability for passion, crumbs for nourishment. But healing begins right there, when you stop looking for someone to blame outside and start looking within. The soul that has healed itself has, first and foremost, learned to close doors, and not with anger, but with wisdom, because not just anyone deserves access to the sacred you've become. But to get to that point, you must first see what still holds you back. Often, what still imprisons you isn't the person, it's their memory. It's the unconscious hope that, one day, everything will be explained. Everything will return. Everything will change. It's the fantasy that that dysfunctional love will transform, even without real effort. But what you need to understand is that the pain you insist on feeding with memories won't heal. And here's the cruelest part. Sometimes it's not the other person who rejects you. It's you who haven't yet fully chosen yourself. It's you who, out of fear of loneliness, accepts the almost. You adapt to the bare minimum. You settle for less than you deserve, because there's something inside you that still believes that love means sacrifice, that to be loved, you must first suffer. But that's an old lie. And worst of all, it's a lie they taught you as if it were a virtue. How many times have you been told that love means enduring everything, that relationships are difficult, that no one is perfect, and you believed it? You believed it so much that you started to think being ignored was normal, that being left out was just a phase, that being chosen every now and then was love. But it isn't. Love isn't about frequency, it's about presence. Love isn't about excuses, it's about commitment. Love isn't about fleeting intensity, it's about ongoing depth. And if you haven't found that yet, maybe it's because you're allowing the opposite. Allowing the wrong, the shallow, the intermittent is a kind of self-abandonment. And that's the real invisible problem. It's not just about who you attract, it's about who you let stay, about who you allow to touch your soul as if it were something, when in fact, it is everything. The world is full of people who don't know how to love, but you no longer have to put yourself before them as if it were an obligation. You no longer have to bleed to be accepted, nor mold yourself to fit the love of someone who never learned to love themselves. You have the right, and more than that, the responsibility, to protect what you have become after surviving so much. And perhaps now, as you listen to all this, something is revealing itself within you. A memory, a relationship, a pattern, a pain that returns not because it still hurts, but because it's asking to be released. When you understand that it's not about others, but about what you haven't yet healed within yourself, everything changes. And that can be scary at first. But it's also liberating. Because now for the first time you're no longer waiting for someone else to change. You are changing. And it's this change that begins to dissolve the cycle. You stop chasing. You stop begging. You stop arguing with those who never listen to you. Because the soul that begins to see itself also begins to protect itself. And protecting yourself isn't selfish, it's healing. Maybe what you need now is no longer to understand the other person, but to understand why you stayed so long where they only hurt you. And if all this made sense to you, If this part of the video brought you a mirror, leave a simple but powerful phrase in the comments. Now I close doors that I once left too open. This sentence is more than a comment, it's a choice, an affirmation, a new beginning. And now, let's dig deeper, because what comes next will reveal the hidden root of all this. And perhaps you'll realize that the pain you're experiencing isn't just emotional. It has a much deeper origin, an origin that lives in the soul. Rumi said, "You have to keep breaking your heart until it opens." And most of us spend our entire lives trying to avoid this process, trying not to break, trying to glue the pieces back together before we even understand why they broke. But ironically, it is precisely in this breaking that the soul begins to blossom. Because while the heart is closed, it protects itself, but it also limits itself. It doesn't feel deeply. It doesn't love fully. It doesn't recognize itself. It just survives. But surviving isn't living, and living with your soul amputated, numbed, fragmented by unresolved pain is a kind of internal exile. You walk through the world, but you're not truly present. You interact with people, but you don't truly connect. You talk about love, but you still carry fear. Fear of being rejected, fear of being abandoned, fear of being truly seen and yet not being chosen. And that's where everything begins to change. Because when the heart finally opens, not by choice, but by exhaustion, it ceases to be a battlefield. It becomes a temple, a place where you no longer allow the chaos outside to invade the peace you've built within. This is the beginning of true spiritual healing. Because up until now, everything has been emotional. Everything has been mental. There have been explanations, reflections, attempts to understand patterns. But the root of suffering, it lies beyond the mind. It lives in a deeper place, in a space where words no longer reach, where only silence is understood. And that is where the spiritual resides. A wounded soul carries memories that aren't just yours. Much of your pain stems from inherited patterns, experiences you absorbed before you could even speak. Emotions that aren't conscious but that govern your choices, your bonds, your fears. That's why even when you seem to be doing everything right, you continue to attract everything wrong. Because you don't attract what you desire. You attract what you haven't yet healed. And that's the blind spot. This is the space where the spiritual root of pain resides, that which no one sees, but which controls everything. And that's why real healing begins when you stop trying to fix others and start observing your own shadow. Shadow is everything you reject in yourself. It's the part of you that feels inadequate, unworthy, guilty, needy. It's the wounded child who learned to love by self-denial. It's the silence you made when you needed to scream. It's the yes you said out of fear of being abandoned. It's the mask you wore to appear strong, when everything in you just wanted to be embraced. And Rumi, with his mystical wisdom, knew this. He wasn't talking about a literal heart. He was talking about essence. He was talking about going through the fire without burning on the outside, but transforming on the inside. About allowing pain not to destroy you, but to reveal you. Because yes, pain reveals. It shows where love is still lacking. It shows where you still betray yourself to please, where you still accept crumbs, when you were born to live in abundance. But when your heart opens, not just breaks, but opens, everything changes. You begin to realize that not just any presence completes you, that not just any touch nourishes you, that not just any pretty word deceives you. Because now, you feel, you intuit, you see beyond the surface, and what once seemed like love now reveals need. What once seemed like connection now reveals dependence. What once seduced you now pushes you away, not because you're colder, but because you're more aware. Because your temple now has walls, it has portals, it has rules, and not just anyone can enter where the sacred now resides. Spirituality isn't about escape. It's not about turning your back on the world. It's about being so whole within yourself that the outside world no longer defines you. It no longer controls you. It no longer dictates whether you're worthy or not. And when you reach this state, you begin to love differently. You love without losing yourself. You care without sacrificing yourself. You give without emptying yourself. And above all, you choose yourself, not out of ego, but out of awakening. Because now you understand that leaving yourself last is the cruelest form of self-abandonment. This spiritual root of pain, this hidden origin that governs so many of your behaviors, only dissolves when you illuminate it with presence, when you decide to stop running, stop distracting yourself, stop using relationships as anesthesia, and start looking at yourself, not with judgment but with truth. Because a soul that truly looks at itself begins to free itself. It begins to realize that much of what it once called love was merely a desperate plea for affection, that many of the people you begged to stay were actually preventing you from growing, that many of the stories that hurt were actually trying to teach you. But to hear this teaching, you need silence, inner silence, space to feel without trying to control, space to cry without shame, space to accept that you still feel, but not as you did before. Now you feel with awareness, with maturity, with an awakened soul, and all of this is just the beginning. If you've made it this far and something inside you has stirred, perhaps it's your soul telling you it's ready to stop running, that it's ready to finally be yours. Write in the comments, "My heart is no longer a battlefield, now it's a temple." This phrase carries a decision, a vibration, and it could be the first step toward the next healing your soul is asking for. Let's go deeper together, because now comes the hidden key that no one told you. No one told you this, but healing is losing your taste for certain poisons. And that's why healing is sometimes scary, because when you truly begin to heal, some things that once nourished you start to make you sick. People you once desired start to seem strange. Situations that once enveloped you now seem too small for the size of your soul. Real healing isn't just about feeling better. It's about seeing with new eyes. It's about realizing that many of the bonds you had weren't love, they were dependency. They weren't ties, they were chains. And that hurts. It hurts to realize that much of what you called connection was actually a reflection of the emptiness you carried inside and tried to fill with any company. But something changes. The key turns inside, without warning, without a manual, and suddenly you no longer beg. You no longer put yourself on low shelves. You no longer trade your peace in exchange for presence. Because the soul that has healed itself, it no longer hungers for everything. It has discretion. It has discernment. It has a silence that speaks louder than 1,000 justifications. You know that moment when someone who once threw you off balance appears again, and you simply feel nothing anymore? It's not hate. It's not hurt. It's emptiness. A good emptiness. A clean emptiness. A sacred space that was once filled with chaos and is now a dwelling place of peace. That's the signal. That's the point of no return. That's when you understand. You're no longer the same person. The key has turned. And what no one told you is that this moment can be lonely, because when you heal, you distance yourself, not by choice but by necessity, because the energy changes, the dialogue changes, the perspective changes, and many people simply don't keep up. Many people still need pain to feel. They need drama to exist. They need the absence of others to try to find themselves. But you're no longer moved by crumbs. You're no longer moved by empty promises. You're no longer fooled by the idea that someone will save you, because you understand the only possible salvation is reconnecting with yourself. Rumi said, "What you seek is seeking you. But how can you find something true if you're still busy nurturing attachments that diminish you? How can you make room for sacred love if your soul is still trapped in stories that have left open scars? It's impossible. You can't live the new while dragging the old around as if it were part of your identity. And the curious thing is that when the soul heals, it doesn't make a fuss. It simply refuses. It refuses noise. It refuses haste. It refuses excess. It refuses everything that doesn't speak to the essence. There's no more effort. There's no more trying to convince anyone. There's just presence. And a clean presence doesn't negotiate with those who live with exposed wounds. The healed soul is no longer in a hurry to be understood. It simply is. It takes a deep breath in the face of chaos and chooses silence. It no longer goes to war to prove its worth, because it has already seen itself. It has embraced itself. It has crossed the desert alone, and therefore it knows where the oasis is. And maybe you're there right now, feeling all this happen in silence, watching people walk away, and wondering at your own calm, watching what once shook you now no longer affect you, maybe even doubting your coldness. But no, it's not coldness. It's emotional maturity. It's spiritual evolution. It's your soul saying, "Now I take care of myself." And that doesn't mean you've closed yourself off to love. On the contrary, you've opened yourself up, but you've opened yourself up to true love. The love that respects, the love that embraces, the love that doesn't demand that you diminish yourself, the love that recognizes the sacredness that exists within you. You no longer want intensity without depth. You no longer want physical presence and emotional absence. You no longer want to be half of anything, because you've become whole in a way that no longer fits into halves. And that, yes, is the true key to healing. It's not about stopping feeling, it's about feeling wisely. It's about looking at someone and instead of thinking, will they choose me? Thinking, does they deserve to enter this space? Because now there's a space within you that is a temple, and not everyone can enter where the sacred resides. You still love, but you love with limits. You love with roots. You love with open eyes. You love with awareness. And that's why you no longer bleed for just anyone. Maybe you still feel emotional. You still remember, you still miss it. But missing it doesn't make you go back, because you understand that what hurt you doesn't deserve to be romanticized. That what confused you, it can no longer be called destiny. And if you're experiencing this now, if you feel like you're at that exact point, between the old that no longer holds you back and the new that's still forming, breathe. That's exactly where the soul begins to blossom. In the in-between, in the silence, in the space where you finally no longer lose yourself trying to fit in anywhere. This is the power of the hidden key. It doesn't open doors to the outside. It opens internal portals. It reconnects you with something that's always been there, but you didn't have the courage to hear it. Your truth. And your truth now doesn't shout. It simply guides you. If this part of the video spoke to you, if something deep inside you resonated with these words, leave a phrase in the comments that can anchor this new phase of your life. Write, "Today I refuse what I once begged for." Because this phrase isn't just a comment, it's a liberation, it's a choice, and it can be your next step. Because what comes next is real life applying this key, and perhaps you'll discover that you're already living it. Maybe you're exactly at that point. A silent internal point, almost imperceptible to outsiders, but profoundly transformative for those who experience it. A point where something that once would have destroyed you now merely passes through without knocking you down. Where what was once a storm is now just a light rain that you learn to let pass. Because yes, someone is gone. Someone who once disorganized you internally, who kept you awake at night, who made you doubt your worth every time they silenced your messages or offered you half of what you needed. But now, instead of imploding, you just breathe. The pain still lingers, yes, but you don't reject it. You embrace it, observe it, and let it run its course without dominating you. You begin to realize that you are no longer a hostage to answers that don't come, nor to gestures that confuse. And perhaps this is the greatest liberation, when you become free not because the other person has returned, but because you no longer wait. You no longer beg for presence, for affection, for crumbs, because something within you has understood, profoundly, that merit isn't asked for, it's acknowledged. That true love isn't negotiated, it's manifested. In the past, this would have broken you. The absence, the contempt, the neglect. You would bend, mold, and distort yourself, trying to understand what you did wrong, trying to change some part of yourself to be seen, trying to prove yourself to someone you, deep down, never wanted to see. And it exhausted you, because while you tried to be enough for someone else, you distanced yourself from yourself. While you sought love outside, you betrayed yourself inside. But now you breathe. Now you don't rush. Now you don't chase. You observe. And in observing, you realize what you never wanted to see before. That relationship diminished you. That presence disconnected you from your own essence. That attachment wasn't love. It was fear. Fear of being alone. Fear of not being loved again. Fear of never finding anything like it again. But now you understand that similar no longer works, because what resembles pain cannot lead you to peace. What resembles chaos cannot lead you to healing. And so, you choose yourself, even if it means giving up a story that once meant everything, even if it costs nights of silence and old tears that still flow without warning. You are no longer the battlefield. You have become the warrior who has survived all the wars. The war of neediness, the war of emotional dependence, The war of feeling invisible in relationships where you gave everything. And those who survive change. Those who survive learn. They learn to look more clearly. They learn to hear what's behind the words. They learn to identify what hurts before it even touches them. And that's why, even when homesickness hits, you don't back down. Because homesickness no longer deceives you. It no longer takes you back to places where you were hurt trying to be loved. Now you honor your story. Honor every tear that fell on your pillow. Honor every time you rebuilt yourself alone, without applause, without an audience. Honor every new beginning that no one saw but that built you. This is the moment you realize you haven't lost anyone. You've found yourself. That it wasn't rejection. It was redirection. That it wasn't abandonment. It was divine protection. That it wasn't the end. It was the door to a truer, more intimate, more personal beginning. And perhaps now, as you hear these words, you're mentally reliving some recent situation. Maybe it was that ignored message, that declined invitation, that silence that spoke louder than 1,000 explanations. And you felt that knot in your chest, that old feeling of not being enough returning with a vengeance. But then, instead of blaming yourself, you simply stopped. You embraced yourself. You breathed. And that's when you realized something in you had already changed. The pain comes, yes, but now it comes and goes. Because you no longer feed it. You don't embrace it as an identity. You only recognize it as a visitor. And like all visitors, it arrives, teaches, and leaves. And when it leaves, you remain, whole, firm, at peace. This peace is not the absence of pain. It is the presence of self-awareness. It is the presence of a soul that has listened to itself so much that it now knows how to discern what is worth keeping and what has already served its purpose. That is why today, you calmly reject what yesterday you would have accepted with despair, because now you know that love that hurts is not love. It is a repetition of a wound, and you no longer bleed. You don't bleed from absence because you've learned to be your own presence. You don't bleed from indifference because you recognize your worth beyond the gaze of others. You don't bleed from rejection because you've understood that being rejected on the outside sometimes means being protected on the inside. And this new you may even seem distant, cold, insensitive to those still living in emotional dependence. But for those who have already crossed the valley of silent pain, this new version of you is the most sacred, the freest, the most honest. Perhaps at this very moment you're at that point between feeling and deciding, between remembering and letting go, between falling back and rising. And that's okay. This point is human. This point is necessary, because it's where true choice is born. The choice to not go back to what no longer serves you, even if it still hurts. The choice to move on, even when you're afraid. The choice to be true to yourself, even if it takes you away from the one you loved. If this touched something within you, if you felt like you're living this exact example in your life, share with me a quote that marks this turning point. Write in the comments, "Today, I breathe where before I imploded." Because this quote is a milestone, a symbol, a reminder of how far you've come. And now, from here on out, let's move toward what truly matters, the awareness that transforms your pain into strength. Rumi said, "Don't settle for stories of how things happen to others. Awaken your own legend." And perhaps you lived for a long time trapped in stories that weren't yours, stories that repeated the same plots of pain, abandonment, rejection, and the constant attempt to be chosen by someone who never had the capacity to see your essence. You molded yourself, adjusted yourself, diminished yourself, trying to fit into a script that was never written for you to star in. And yet, you persisted, because it was what you knew, because it was what you were taught to believe was love. But there comes a time when everything inside you starts screaming, not in despair but in awakening, a silent scream, one that doesn't come from your throat. It comes from your soul. That moment when you feel like you can no longer continue being a spectator in your own story. When you realize you've spent too much time abandoning yourself to keep others close. That you've begged too much for crumbs. When you were born to experience emotional and spiritual abundance. This is the shift in consciousness. It doesn't happen all at once. Sometimes it's subtle. It comes in a conversation where, for the first time, you don't accept the tone you've always accepted. It comes in a memory that, instead of making you cry, makes you smile in relief. It comes when you look in the mirror and recognize that you no longer carry the same weight in your gaze. You're no longer waiting for something external to validate you. You've started seeing yourself, listening to yourself, choosing yourself. And herein lies the truth. You're not becoming cold. You're becoming whole. You're ceasing to seek outside what can only be nourished within. You're ceasing to build castles on other people's lands, to finally inhabit your own emotional terrain. You're returning expectations that were never yours. You're gathering parts of yourself that were trapped in old relationships, unfulfilled promises, silences that hurt more than harsh words. And all of this didn't harden you. It strengthened you. It restored you. Because there's a big difference between closing yourself off due to trauma and protecting yourself out of self-love. What you're experiencing now isn't coldness. It's spiritual maturity. It's the lucidity of someone who's felt chaos and decided not to go back. Of someone who's been torn apart inside and decided to gently mend themselves. Of someone who's completely lost themselves in someone and now only wants to find themselves. You no longer need to prove your worth. You no longer need to chase after those who leave too easily. You no longer need to lower yourself to keep those who only know how to devalue you. Because you've understood that dignity isn't pride. It's awareness of value. It's knowing that what you offer is too rare to be exchanged for uncertainty, emotional games, and loves that only work when you devalue yourself. And this awareness, this inner shift, transforms everything. It transforms the way you love, the way you relate, the way you choose. It transforms your conversations, your energy, your frequency. You stop repeating unconscious patterns. You stop clinging to what hurts just because it's familiar. You stop calling love what causes you anxiety. You begin to honor your journey. You respect your own story. You walk with your head held high, not because you feel superior, but because you no longer accept living hunched over. A shift in consciousness doesn't come with celebration. It comes with silence. A silence so profound that even your wounds learn to be silent. It comes with clarity, with cleanliness, with a peace that, at first, seems strange. Because you've spent so long living in a state of emotional survival, tranquility feels like the absence of something. But it's not absence, it's presence. Presence of self. Presence of the soul. Rumi also said, "You were born with wings. Why do you prefer to crawl through life?" And perhaps, until now, you've done so without realizing it. You crawled for affection, for validation, for emotional crumbs, for bonds that, in truth, only existed to keep you grounded. But now you look at your wings with more respect, with more love, with more courage, and you decide, even when afraid, to make room to fly. Flying doesn't mean running away. It means soaring, expanding your vision, seeing beyond what hurts you, seeing where the truth lies and where the illusion lies. And the great truth is that when you awaken, the stories that once defined you no longer make sense. They continue to exist, but now they are just that. Stories, not open wounds, not automatic repetitions, not emotional prisons, just stories. And you begin to write a new one that doesn't stem from pain but from consciousness, one that needs no villains, no saviors, one where you are the protagonist and at the same time, the temple where everything rebuilds itself. This awareness doesn't make you unreachable, but it does make you selective, because you begin to understand that your energy is sacred, that your presence is healing, that your vulnerability isn't weakness, it's a bridge, and that your silence is the language of someone who has learned to listen to themselves before trying to explain themselves to the world. And perhaps right now, you're precisely on that journey, leaving the old version that begged for love, and entering the new one that is love, that overflows, that offers without emptying itself, that feels without clinging, that gives without losing its center. Because the healed soul doesn't love less, it loves better, with more calm, with more clarity, with more awareness. If you feel like you're experiencing this awakening, if this shift in consciousness has already begun to happen within you, even if it's still just a whisper, leave a phrase in the comments that represents this point in your journey. Write, "I stopped crawling, now I walk with my soul." This phrase can be your anchor, your marker of rebirth, because the journey isn't over yet. It's just taking on new meaning. And in the next step, we'll dive even deeper, because the awakening soul also begins to call others around it. If you've made it this far, it's because something inside you has already begun to change. Perhaps silently, perhaps still with doubts, but with the certainty that you are no longer the same person you were when this video began. And that, in itself, is an act of courage. A healed soul no longer lives trying to fit in where it has always been rejected. It no longer lives for acceptance. It lives to be true, to be whole, to be yours. This is the moment I invite you to continue this journey with me. If this video spoke to your soul, if you felt yourself walking inside along each word, subscribe to the channel, not by impulse, but by choice. Because here, each video is a portal, a safe space where your pain is understood and your healing is celebrated in silence. If you stayed until the end, leave a like. It's not just a gesture, it's a symbol, a silent, I received this message, and now, it doesn't stop here. The next video is on the screen, and it's the natural continuation of this transformation you began today. Click, watch, feel, because your soul deserves this reunion. Let's continue. The journey is just beginning.